is President Trump really worth, and how much money does he owe? An explosive New York Times report alleging that the president has not paid any income taxes in 10 of the past 15 years. He did pay federal taxes in 2016 and 2017, but just $750 worth. The Times obtained more than 2 decades of the president's financials. Their reporting showing chronic losses and years of tax avoidance. The president did, however, pay Medicare, Social Security, and the alternative minimum tax. NBC News has not reviewed these documents, but they do raise a whole lot of questions about the criminal and civil legal exposure the president may have. NBC News correspondent for investigations Tom Winter joining me now. Tom, take us through some of the major headlines from this Times reporting. I know there are many.
That's right, Allison. We could probably spend the next 15, 20 minutes reviewing the article and the reporting. And as you said, we haven't had a chance to look at the tax documents ourselves, but the reporting from the Times is pretty clear on several fronts. One, in 2016 and 2017, in each one of those years, there was approximately $750 that were paid in personal income tax by the president, according to the documents that the Times reviewed. On top of that, there's approximately, or just a little bit less, I should say, than $400 million in debt that is due in the next 4 years, or less than the next 4 years, from the president. Some of that he is personally guaranteed. That means he's on the hook, Allison, in much the way that maybe you or I would be if we were to take out a mortgage, that if we don't pay it and default on that debt, then they can personally come after the president's cash and assets to be able to recoup some of their losses. Another point is that his businesses have been losing a significant amount of money. Now, he's used those losses to offset the gains that he has made and the income that he's made. So in other words, he could get money from some of the licensing and from some of the royalties from some of his properties. But that image that we just looked at there of the Trump International Hotel and some of his other properties, particularly his golf properties, things have not been going so well, and he's accrued losses there according to his tax returns. And that's something that's pretty significant as well. And that's allowed him in some ways and through some other accounting work that he's been able to do to pay so little in those personal income tax returns, Allison.
All right, Tom, you said it. There are a whole lot of issues here, and you and I could talk about this for a while. I'd like to get into them in a little more detail. Let's talk more about this debt issue. The New York Times says the president has more than $300 million in loans coming due within the next few years, loans that, as you said, he's personally responsible for repaying. But we don't know who's on the other side of those loans. What are the concerns here from a national security standpoint and otherwise?
Right. So the details in the president's personal financial disclosure, which is made is because he's the president and is made public. It's something that any one of us can look at, anybody at home can look at, indicate a series of lenders. Some of those lenders we have never been able to get information or details on. On top of that, we know that 2 of the lenders, one being Deutsche Bank, another being a capital lending firm here in New York City, securitize those mortgages. So for some folks that are familiar with what happened in the details of the 2008 financial crisis, there were residential mortgage-backed securities. They basically took up a bunch of home loans, chopped them up, put them together, and essentially created a bond. The same thing happens in the commercial market, in commercial real estate, which is where the president has his holdings and where a lot of his properties exist. So basically, some of the mortgages or some of the loans that are taken out from the president could have been parsed out, put into all sorts of different types of loans. And so we don't know who holds those commercial mortgage-backed securities, if any of them have been securitized. I mean, that's a big question here. We don't know what we don't know with respect to who holds the president's debt. And then typically with large real estate deals, like the types of deals that are done here in New York City, there's what's called mezzanine loans. So there's other people that invest in on top of the banks to be able to, so the bank doesn't have the full exposure to the loan. Again, who are some of the individuals that might be a part of those mezzanine loans? We just don't know, Allison, who is actually holding the president's debt. And since he's personally guaranteed it, it's something that obviously he's going to be paying attention to, understandably. So who holds that debt? What do they hold over the president, if anything? And I think that those are some questions that that a lot of folks are finding today to be questions that need answers to, Allison.
All right, Tom, let's move on to the next big issue, depreciation on the president's properties. You explained this earlier. For people who don't know how that works, it's basically the president writing off losses on his buildings to offset some of his taxes. This raises legal questions here, and it's something the Manhattan DA is looking into.
That's exactly right, Allison. So depreciating a real estate asset is something that is very common, particularly when it's when you have commercial real estate or you have a property that you have that's an investment property that you're getting rental income on. This is done on the residential side as well as the commercial side. And basically you're saying is that over a period of years, you can lay out the losses for fixing a roof, for redoing a facade or capital improvements that you put into a building. It's something that is completely legal, that's done often. But the question here and what's being looked at is whether or not some of the totals that are being presented in the president's tax returns for depreciation, if those are adding up to what he's presenting towards lenders, if it's something that is actually adding up to the real math. I mean, can the president prove that the levels of depreciation he's seeking on some of his buildings and assets are those in fact real? The rub here with respect to the Manhattan District Attorney's investigation, which is believed to be the most the investigation that's furthest along when you look at his investigation, the investigation by the New York Attorney General, is whether or not the president claimed one thing to the state and to the IRS when he filed his tax returns, and then claimed something else to the banks to inflate those assets so he would be able to get a loan or be able to get lending. If there's some sort of a financial impropriety there on either side, those would be violations of law. It's something that the Manhattan District Attorney has laid out in their appellate cases recently, and so there's several statutes that could be in violation there, and that could potentially be of concern on a civil liability standpoint, from a standpoint of fines and other sort of regulatory issues that the Trump organization and its officers, which include the president, could face. It could also lead to criminal violations. So that's something that we'll bear watching in the coming weeks and months, Allison.
Yeah, Tom, to put it in simplest terms for people, right? You can't say your assets are worth one value on one hand and another on another. They got to add up. You say the magic words there, criminal liability. Does that mean that the president could potentially end up in jail once he's out of office if these things, if these improprieties are found to be true, or is it just way too early to even be talking about that?
I think it's a little bit too early, Allison, and I know people may be throwing things at the screen right now that believe that this is a little bit further along. I think really the Manhattan District Attorney's Office needs those underlying documents that that they have sought in a battle that, you know, as you and I have discussed, has gone all the way to the Supreme Court. They're documents from Mazars USA LLC. That's a tax preparing firm that works for the president. They need to see how these tax returns got put together. But to answer your question, with a number of ifs and a number of hypotheticals, it is possible because it does involve the president's personal tax returns. And of course, he sits or had been sitting at the top of the Trump organization, that he is potentially criminally liable here. So there's a lot more road to kind of see down, and there's a lot more that investigators probably have to do. But the Manhattan District Attorney's case is, I think, further along than people give it credit for. They have confidential informants. So this is something where we'll have to watch closely, particularly if Election Day comes and the results are not in the president's favor.
Tom, quite a report out from the New York Times over the weekend. Thank you so much for walking us through it and the potential implications here. Appreciate it.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.